The train driver suddenly saw several wolves standing on the railway tracks right in front of his moving train. Against all logic, the predators did not run away, even when he sounded the loud horn multiple times. Following his instincts, the driver applied emergency braking. When the train finally stopped and the wolves stepped aside, he was horrified to see what the pack had been desperately trying to protect. The harsh Swedish province of Norland had always been a sparsely populated land. In the heart of this northern region lay the village of Älvdalen, surrounded by endless coniferous forests and snow-covered mountains. The main connection to the outside world was the railway, cutting through the dense forest like a steel river. Erik grew up in a family of railway workers. His father, Niels, and grandfather, Gustav, passed down to him not only technical skills, but also a special understanding of these lands. The ability to sense the forest's presence and notice even the slightest changes in its mood. As a child, Erik watched his father work with admiration. Powerful locomotives fascinated the boy. When his father took him on train rides, Erik would press against the window, absorbing the beauty of the passing landscapes. Northern lights, wolves gliding between the trees, and majestic moose standing at the forest's edge. To get an education, Erik went to Stockholm. The big city overwhelmed him, but despite all the opportunities of the capital, his heart longed for his home forests. He missed the crystal-clear air of his homeland and the starry nights untouched by city lights. Studying was easy for him. His practical knowledge from his father blended well with theory. After graduating with honors, Erik returned home and got a job at the same railway depot. The manager, an old friend of his father, gladly welcomed the young specialist. At first, Erik was given simple tasks, but soon his skills and intuition were recognized. After 2 years, he became an assistant driver on passenger trains, and later, after gaining experience, he began driving freight trains, massive steel giants traveling across northern Sweden. Erik loved his job. On every journey, he discovered new sides of the wild nature's beauty in different seasons. He especially loved winter when the northern forest took on an almost magical charm with its snowy landscapes and frozen, shimmering lakes. It was on such a winter day that Erik experienced something that forever changed his view of the world. It was an ordinary trip. Erik was driving a heavy freight train loaded with construction materials through the snowy forest, enjoying the peaceful scenery outside the cabin window. Half of the journey was behind him, and there were about 2 hours left until the next stop. As an experienced driver, his sharp eyes were fixed on the railway tracks stretching into the distance. The cabin was warm and cozy. The radio played quietly, broadcasting the latest news and music, occasionally interrupted by dispatcher messages. Erik took a sip of hot coffee from his thermos and continued his calm journey through the winter wilderness. Suddenly, a few miles ahead, he noticed a strange dark spot directly on the tracks. His heart skipped a beat. An obstacle on the railway always meant danger, but the distance was too great to see what exactly was blocking the way of the heavy train. Erik immediately slowed down and focused, trying to identify the object while preparing to use emergency braking at any moment. His hands gripped the control levers tighter, and his mind started forming a plan in case of an unexpected situation. As the train got closer, the dark spot took shape. It was not a fallen tree or man-made debris, as sometimes happened on this stretch of the track. What Erik saw made his heart beat faster. There were several animals on the tracks, and they didn't seem to be moving away despite the approaching danger. As he got even closer, Erik was stunned to realize that it was a pack of wolves. Their gray and white silhouettes stood out clearly against the untouched white snow. The animals stood tightly together, as if deliberately blocking the train's path. Such behavior was so unusual for these cautious predators that Erik couldn't believe his eyes. In all his years of experience, he had never seen wild animals refuse to run when a train approached. Wolves, known for their wariness and distrust of humans, usually disappeared into the forest long before a train could spot them. Following protocol, Erik immediately pressed the horn. The powerful sound echoed through the forest, bouncing off the trees and returning as a distorted, prolonged howl. Usually such a noise would make any wild animal flee in panic, but to Erik's greatest surprise, the wolves did not move an inch. They continued standing there, forming a living barricade across the tracks. Erik sounded the horn again, but the result was the same. The wolves remained motionless. He had only a few seconds to make a decision. The official instructions in such cases were clear. The safety of passengers and cargo came first. If wild animals blocked the tracks and did not move after a warning signal, the train driver was supposed to continue moving, reducing speed only slightly to lessen the impact if a collision became inevitable. Logic told him that this was exactly what he should do. The train was too heavy to stop in such a short distance, and wild animals usually ran away at the last moment when they saw an unavoidable collision. But something about the wolves' strange behavior made him hesitate. Why weren't they running? What was making them stand there risking their lives? Deep down, Eric had always believed that animals, especially intelligent ones like wolves, never acted without reason. If they were behaving unusually, there had to be an important cause. And maybe that reason was so serious that they were willing to risk everything. After a moment of agonizing hesitation that lasted only a fraction of a second, Eric suddenly pulled the emergency brake lever. The train was only about 100 feet away from the animals, distance that a massive freight train, even with emergency braking, would still cover due to its momentum. The wheels screeched against the rails, shattering the silence of the forest with a piercing metallic shriek. Sparks flew from under the wheels, leaving bright trails on the snowy tracks. The train began to slow down, but not quickly enough. Eric knew that he probably wouldn't be able to stop completely before reaching the wolf pack. Closing his eyes, Eric braced himself for the inevitable impact. Each second felt like an eternity. He could already imagine the massive steel machine crashing into the living barrier, and the thought made him shudder. Despite his decision, despite doing everything he could to prevent a tragedy, a sense of guilt was already creeping into his heart. When the screeching of the wheels faded, Eric opened his eyes and sighed in relief. The train had stopped just inches from the wolves. It felt as if fate itself had intervened to prevent the collision. Or perhaps his instincts and experience had worked better than he expected, allowing him to calculate the perfect moment to brake. But what Eric saw next made him freeze in shock and disbelief. The wolves stood in a tight circle, their heads raised as they howled anxiously. They did not run away or show aggression. It was as if they were guarding something, and only when the danger of a collision had passed did the predators slowly begin to move aside, like an honor guard that had completed its duty. What Eric saw next shook him to his core. Lying on the tracks was a man. An elderly man was trying to get up but couldn't. Something was keeping him in place. Eric couldn't believe his eyes. A man in the middle of the wilderness, dozens of miles from the nearest settlement, and wolves protecting him instead of attacking. This was beyond his understanding of the world. Eric didn't dare step out of the cabin right away, not when wild predators were so close. But the wolves, as if sensing his fear, slowly retreated into the forest, still watching the scene from a safe distance. Their eyes, reflecting the winter sunlight, remained alert and watchful. Once he was sure the animals had moved far enough, Eric grabbed a crowbar for self-defense, jumped down into the snow, and cautiously approached the fallen figure. With every step, his amazement grew. The elderly man was dressed in warm but worn-out forester's clothing. His face, framed by a gray beard, seemed oddly familiar to Eric. As he moved closer, he recognized the man. It was Olaf Bergman, a local gamekeeper, already in his 70s. This man had dedicated his entire life to protecting the forests and their inhabitants, and everyone in the region knew and respected him. Eric remembered him from childhood. The bearded giant with kind eyes often visited the school to teach children about nature, encouraging them to respect and protect the wilderness. But as Eric stepped even closer, he saw something shocking. The old man's hands were handcuffed to the rails. Cold metal was tightly clamped around his wrists, and the skin around the cuffs was raw and bleeding from his desperate attempts to break free. His legs were also tied with a thick rope, leaving him no chance of escaping on his own. Barely holding back his anger and horror, Eric dropped to his knees beside the old man. "Olaf, what happened? Who did this to you?" he exclaimed, desperately trying to free the gamekeeper. The old man lifted his weary but still clear eyes. "Eric, is that you, son? Thank the heavens." His voice was weak, but there was an unbreakable will to live in it. "I had no hope left, but they came. They saved me." As Eric struggled to free Olaf from his bindings, the old man, pausing often due to weakness, told him a chilling story. It turned out that local poachers, who had long held a grudge against the principled gamekeeper, had decided to take cruel revenge on him for tirelessly interfering with their illegal activities. For many years, this fearless man had saved animals from traps and bullets, tracked down violators, and reported them to the authorities. His most intense battle had been for the protection of wolves, a rare subspecies in the region that was on the brink of extinction. Many wolves in these forests had survived only thanks to the gamekeeper's dedicated efforts. The poachers had threatened Olaf many times, but he had never believed they would dare to commit such an atrocity. They had ambushed him while he was patrolling the area, knocked him unconscious with a blow to the head, and when he regained consciousness, he found himself handcuffed to the railway tracks, waiting for an oncoming train. "Let your precious wolves eat whatever's left of you," they had sneered before leaving him to die a slow, agonizing death. Olav explained that when he heard the horn of the approaching train, he had already come to terms with his fate. But then something incredible happened. A pack of wolves emerged from the forest, the very same animals he had protected all these years. Instead of attacking the helpless man, they surrounded him, forming a living shield. If not for the wolves, their distinct forms standing out clearly against the white snow, Eric would never have noticed the lone figure of the old man on the tracks in time to stop. "They remember," Olav whispered, barely holding back tears. "All these years, I thought I was just doing my job. But they remember every life saved, every trap removed, every wound bandaged." At last, after freeing the old man from the handcuffs and ropes, Eric helped him to his feet and carefully led him to the locomotive cabin. Olav was weak and dehydrated, his wrists severely wounded from the handcuffs, and his legs numb from the cold and tight bindings. But he was alive, and that was all that mattered. Once inside the warm cabin, Eric treated his wounds with antiseptic from the first aid kit and gave him hot tea. Slowly, Olav started to recover. His gaze kept drifting toward the forest where, in the shadow of the trees, the silhouettes of the wolves could still be seen, patiently watching from a distance. "You know, Eric," the old man said, still looking at his saviors, "people often think they are the masters of this land, that they can take from nature without giving anything in return. But that's not true. We are just a part of the great circle of life, and what we do always comes back to us, whether as kindness or cruelty." Eric radioed the nearest station and reported the incident. At first, his account was met with disbelief, then with shock. Police and medics promised to meet the train at the next station and send a search team to track down the poachers. An hour later, the train resumed its journey. As it picked up speed, Eric glanced back and saw the wolf pack emerging from the forest, running parallel to the train for a while, as if escorting their old friend. Then one by one, the gray guardians disappeared into the trees, vanishing into the silent wilderness. This story shook the entire region. The police quickly tracked down and arrested the poachers, who, overwhelmed by the evidence against them, had no choice but to confess to their horrific crime. After receiving medical treatment, Olav Bergman returned to his duties as a gamekeeper. But after what he had been through, he became even more devoted to protecting wildlife. The tale of the wolves who saved a man spread far beyond Elfdalen, becoming a local legend. For Eric, this experience was a turning point in his life. He had always loved nature, always felt connected to it, but now that connection had taken on a deeper meaning. He realized that wild animals, which humans often fear or see only as a resource, are capable of emotions and actions far beyond mere instinct. Every time Eric passed through the stretch of forest where his encounter with the wolves had happened, he slowed the train and carefully watched the snow-covered pines. Sometimes he thought he could see gray shadows moving among the trees, silent guardians of the wilderness, reminding him that loyalty and gratitude know no boundaries between the worlds of humans and wild animals. And in those moments, Eric always gave a special signal. 3 short blasts of the horn, echoing through the taiga, carrying his silent gratitude and respect to those who shared this beautiful and fragile world with him.